Hey, Epic. It's all good. Even when you're on the other account, I guess I could just call you Epic. How's your day been? What's up? I'm feeling a lot better since Thursday. Tika says hello. Hello. He's playing Dark and Darker or something. I don't know. Something like that. As the Epic said, well, today was terrible. But Friday and Saturday was great. Okay, jeez. Oh, well, that sucks. Well, hopefully tomorrow will be a good day too. Not a terrible day, 'cause that would be terrible. Let's see, you went to a Southeast Championship Rubik's Cube competition. It was a 3-day competition. Whoa. So that was today. Oh, it's 3 days. So what? Did you do bad today, but you did good on the other days? Hopefully. Let's see. I I'm better now since Thursday, and it seems like I will be getting some new sparring gloves, so I'm excited for that. And then I can spar with people and not feel like I'm gonna like hurt their face because I'm using the wrong gloves. Let's see. Epic said I did about how I expected Friday. What does that say? These little emojis get in the way. I was good Saturday. I broke 4 personal bests. Hey, that's awesome. Let's see. I did a little below average during 2v2 second round, but that was okay because I suck at 2v2 anyway. And then, oh no, and then, and then what? And then you fell on your face? No, I'm kidding. Your mind. Oh, mind your French, okay? I won't say the bad word, I guess. Well, Epic is giving us the dramatic pause. Dramatic pause. Let's see. We don't even talk about 3v3 second round. Oh no. Oh no. It was that bad, huh? I mean, just practice and you'll improve. It's not too bad. Don't sweat about it. Okay? Well, I am going to continue on with chapters 4 through 6. I know it might seem like I'm reading less chapters from last week, but the reality is these 2 chapters are pretty long. That's the reality. So it's not bad. Alrighty, so we're gonna start with chapter 4. Oh yeah, and in case you forgot where we're at, we're in basic training still. Can't recall how long he's been here. I think it's still the first day, or we're moving on to like the second or third day. But yeah, so we're in basic. Chapter 4. And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people that are with thee are too many. Now, therefore, go to, proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, Whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return. And there returned of the people 20,002. And there remained 10,000. And the Lord said unto Gideon, The people are yet too many. Bring them down unto the water, and I will try them for thee there. So he brought down the people unto the water. And the Lord said unto Gideon, Every one that lappeth the water with his tongue, as a dog lappeth, him shalt thou set by himself. Likewise, every one that boweth down upon his knees to drink. And the number of them that drank, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300 men. And the Lord said unto Gideon, By the 300 will I save you. Let all the other people go. Judges chapter 7, verses 2 through 7. 2 weeks after we got there, they took our cots away from us. That is to say, that we had the dubious pleasure of folding them, carrying them 4 miles, and stowing them in a warehouse. By then, it didn't matter. The ground seemed much warmer and quite soft, especially when the alert sounded. Yeah, the alert sounded in the middle of the night, and we had to scramble out and play soldier, which it did about 3 times a week. But I could get back to sleep after one of those mock exercises at once. I had learned to sleep any place, any time, sitting up, standing up, even marching in ranks. Why, I could even sleep through evening parade standing at attention, enjoy the music without being waked by it, and wake instantly at the command to pass in review. I made a very important discovery at Camp Curry. Happiness consists in getting enough sleep. Just that, nothing more. All the wealthy, unhappy people you've ever met take sleeping pills. Mobile infantrymen don't need 'em. Give a cap trooper a bunk and time to sack out in it, and he's as happy as a worm in an apple. Asleep. Theoretically, you were given 8 full hours of sack time every night, and about an hour and a half after evening chow for your own use. But in fact, your night sack time was subject to alerts, to night duty, to field marches, and to acts of God and the whims of those over you. And your evenings, if not ruined by awkward squad or extra duty for minor offenses, were likely to be taken up by shining shoes, doing laundry, swapping haircuts. Some of us got to be pretty fair barbers, but a clean sweep like a billiard ball was acceptable, and anybody can do that. Not to mention 1,000 other chores having to do with equipment, person, and the demands of sergeants. For example, we learned to answer morning roll call with bathed, meaning you had taken at least one bath since last reveille. A man might lie about it. Oh yeah, a man might lie about it and get away with it. I did, a couple times. But at least one in our company who pulled that dodge in the face of convincing evidence that he was not recently bathed got scrubbed with stiff brushes and floor soap by his squad mates, while a corporal instructor chaperoned and made helpful suggestions. But if you didn't have more urgent things to do after supper, you could write a letter, loaf, gossip, discuss the myriad mental and moral shortcomings of sergeants, and, dearest of all, talk about the female of the species. We became convinced that there were no such creatures, just mythology created by inflamed imaginations. One boy in our company claimed to have seen a girl over at regimental headquarters. He was unanimously judged a liar and braggart. Oh my god. Or you could play cards. I learned the hard way not to draw to an inside straight, and I've never done it since. In fact, I haven't played cards since. I have no idea what an inside straight is. Like, yeah, I don't know. Or if you actually did have 20 minutes of your very own, you could sleep. This was a choice very highly thought of. We were always several weeks minus on sleep. I may have given the impression that boot camp was made harder than necessary. This is not correct. It was made as hard as possible and on purpose. It was the firm opinion of every recruit that this was sheer meanness, calculated sadism, fiendish delight of witless morons in making other people suffer. It was not. It was too scheduled, too intellectual, too efficiently and personally organized to be cruelty for the sick pleasure of cruelty. It was planned like surgery for purposes as unimpassioned as those of a surgeon. Oh, I admit that some of the instructors may have enjoyed it, but I don't know. They I don't know that they did. And I do know now that the psych officers tried to weed out any bullies in selecting instructors. They looked for skilled and dedicated craftsmen to follow the art of making things as tough as possible for a recruit. A bully is too stupid, himself too emotionally involved, and too likely to grow tired of his fun and slack off to be efficient. Still, there may have been bullies among them, but I've heard that some surgeons, and not necessarily bad ones, enjoy the cutting and the blood which accompanies the humane art of surgery. That's what it was. Surgery. Its immediate purpose was to get rid of run right. Run right out of the outfit those recruits who were too soft or too babyish ever to make mobile infantrymen. It accomplished that in droves. They darn near ran me out. Our company shrank to platoon size in the first 6 weeks. Some of them were dropped without prejudice and allowed, if they wished, to sweat out their terms in the non-combatant services. Others got bad conduct discharges, or unsatisfactory performance discharges, or medical discharges. Usually, you didn't know why a man left unless you saw him leave and he volunteered the information, but some of them got fed up, said so loudly, and resigned, forfeiting forever their chances of franchise. Some, especially the older men, simply couldn't stand the pace physically, no matter how hard they tried. I remember one, a nice old geezer, named Thurs. Must have been 35. They carried him away in a stretcher while he was still shouting feebly that it wasn't fair, and that he would be back. It was sort of sad because we liked Carruthers and he did try, so we looked the other way and figured we would never see him again. That he was a cinch for a medical discharge and civilian clothes. Only I did see him again, long after. He had refused discharge. You don't have to accept a medical. And wound up as third cook in a troop transport. He remembered me and wanted to talk old times, as proud of being an alumnus of Camp Curry as father is of his Harvard accent. He felt that he was a little bit better than the ordinary Navy man. Well, maybe he was. But much more important than the purpose of carving away the fat quickly and saving the government the training costs of those who would never cut it, was the prime purpose of making as sure as was humanly possible that no cap trooper ever climbed into a capsule for a combat drop unless he was prepared for it. Fit, resolute, disciplined, and skilled. If he is not, it's not fair to the Federation. It's certainly not fair to his teammates. And worst of all, it's not fair to him. But was boot camp more cruelly hard than was necessary? All I can say to that is this. The next time I have to make a combat drop, I want the men on my flanks to be graduates of Camp Curry, or its Siberian equivalent. Otherwise, I'll refuse to enter the capsule. Wow. So, I guess a big change from the movie is that there's no women. There's no women training with these guys. So much so, or I guess so little so, that they don't even think women exist anymore. That's crazy, right? And I did think it was strange in the movie how they had women like just with them, like bathing and stuff together. That was a little weird. But I certainly thought it was a bunch of Crumby. It literally says Crumby in the book. Like, I don't even know. Vicious nonsense at the time. Little things. When we were there a week, we were issued undressed maroons for parade to supplement the fatigues we had been wearing. Dress and full dress uniforms came much later. I took my tunic back to the issue shed and complained to the supply sergeant. Since he was only a supply sergeant and rather fatherly in manner, I thought of him as a semi-civilian. I didn't know how, as of then, to read the ribbons on his chest, or I wouldn't have dared speak to him. "Sergeant, this tunic is too large. My company commander says it fits like a tent." He looked at the garment, didn't touch it. "Really?" "Yeah, I want one that fits." He still didn't stir. "Let me wise you up, sonny boy. There are just two sizes in this army. Too large and too small." "But my company commander—" "No doubt. But what am I going to do?" "Oh, it's advice you want. Well, I've got that in stock. New issue. Just today. Hmm. Tell you what I'll do. Here's a needle, and I'll give you a spool of thread. You won't need a pair of scissors. A razor blade is better. Now, you tied 'em plenty across the hips, but leave cloth to loose 'em again across the shoulders. You'll need it later." Sergeant Zim's only comment on my tailoring was, "You can do better than that. 2 hours extra duty." So, I did better than that by next parade. Those first 6 weeks were all hardening up and hazing, with lots of parade drills and lots of rote marches. Eventually, as files dropped out and went home or elsewhere, we reached the point where we could do 50 miles in 10 hours on the level, which is good mileage for a good horse in case you've never used your legs. We rested, not by stopping, but by changing pace. Slow march, quick march, and trot. Sometimes we went out the full distance, bivouacked and ate field rations, slept in sleeping bags, and marched back the next day. One day, we started out on an ordinary day's march. No bed bugs. Oh, bed bugs. Excuse me. No bed bags on our shoulders. No rations. When we didn't stop for lunch, I wasn't surprised, as I had already learned to sneak sugar and hard bread and such out the mess tent and conceal it about my person. But when we kept on marching away from camp in the afternoon, I began to wonder. But I had learned not to ask silly questions. We halted shortly before dark, 3 companies, now somewhat abbreviated. We formed a battalion parade and marched through it, without music. Guards were mounted, and we were dismissed. I immediately looked up Corporal Instructor Bronsky, because He was a little easier to deal with than the others. And because I felt a certain amount of responsibility, I happened to be, at the time, a recruit corporal myself. These boot chevrons didn't mean much, mostly the privilege of being chewed out for whatever your squad did as well as for what you did yourself, and they could vanish as quickly as they appeared. Zim had tried out all of the older men as temporary non-coms first, and I had inherited a brassard with chevrons on it a couple of days before when our squad leader had folded up and gone to hospital. I said, "Corporal Bronsky, what's the straight word? When is chow hall?" He grinned at me. "I've got a couple of crackers on me. Want me to split 'em with you?" Huh? No, sir. Thank you. I had considerably more than a couple of crackers, I was learning. Now, no chow call? They didn't tell me either, Sonny, but I don't see any copters approaching. Now, if I was you, I'd round up my squad and figure things out. Maybe one of you can hit a jackrabbit with a rock. Yes, sir, but, well, are we staying here all night? We don't have our bedrolls." His eyebrows shot up. "No bedrolls? Well, I do declare!" He seemed to think it over. Ever seen sheep huddled together in a snowstorm? No, sir. Try it. They don't freeze. And maybe you won't. Or if you don't care for company, you might walk around all night. Nobody'll bother you, as long as you stay inside the posted guards. You won't freeze if you keep moving. Of course, you might be a little tired tomorrow." He grinned again. I saluted and went back to my squad. We divvied up, share and share alike, and I came out with less food than I had started. Some of those idiots either hadn't sneaked out anything to eat or had eaten all they had while we marched. But a few crackers and a couple of prunes will do a lot to quiet your stomach sounding alert. The sheep trick works too. Our whole section, 3 squads, did it together. I don't recommend it as a way to sleep. You either in your outer layer, frozen on one side and trying to warm your way inside, or you're inside, fairly warm, but with everybody else trying to shove his elbows, feet, and halitosis, halitosis on you. You migrate from one condition to the other all night long in a sort of Brownian movement, never quite waking up and never really sound asleep. All this makes a night about 100 years long. Dang, they slept like penguins, you know? How, like, they all kind of, like, push into each other and, like, take turns being warm, and, like, they make that huge circle and rotate around in there. It's kind of what that sounds like, except more terrible and not cute. We turned out at dawn to the familiar shout of "Up you come, on the bounce!" encouraged by instructors, batons applied smartly on fundaments sticking out of the piles, and then we did setting up exercises. I felt like a corpse. I didn't see how I could touch my toes, but I did, though it hurt, and 20 minutes later, when we hit the trail, I merely felt elderly. Oh no. Sergeant Zim wasn't even mussed, and somehow the scoundrel had managed to shave. The sun warmed our backs as we marched, and Zim started us singing oldies at first, like Le Regiment de Sambre et Mousse, and Caissons, and Halls of Montezuma, and then our own Cap Trooper's Polka, which moves you into quick step and pulls you on into a trot. Sergeant Zim couldn't carry a tune in a sack. Oh man. All he had was a loud voice. But Breckenridge had a sure, strong lead, and could hold the rest of us in the teeth of Zim's terrible false notes. We all felt cocky and covered with spines. Oh, sorry, there's some beeping going on. But we didn't feel cocky 50 miles later. It had been a long night. It was an endless day. And Zim chewed us out for the way we looked on parade, and several boots got gigged for failing to shave in the 9 whole minutes between the time we fell out after the march and fell back in again for parade. Several recruits resigned that evening, and I thought about it, but didn't because I had those silly boot chevrons and hadn't been busted yet. That night, there was a 2 hour alert, but eventually I learned to appreciate the homey luxury of 2 or 3 dozen warm bodies to snuggle up to. Because 12 weeks later, they dumped me down raw naked in a primitive area of the Canadian Rockies, and I had to make my way 40 miles through the mountains. I made it, and hated the army every inch of the way. Here, give me 1 second. I'll be right back. Was that epic? You auto deleted your message? Or it auto delete. What? I don't know why it would auto delete that. That's lame. I I don't even have like rules set for um my chat. Okay. I had to mute my phone because it was beeping. What are you thinking of the book so far, Epic? Alright, let's see. Where did I leave off? Oh, hold on. Oh, my dogs. Alright, sorry about that. They're like hearing our neighbors like banging around or something. Okay. That night, there was a 2 hour alert, but eventually I learned to appreciate the homey luxury of 2 or 3 dozen warm bodies to snuggle up to because 12 weeks later, they dumped me down raw naked in a primitive area of the Canadian Rockies, and I had to make my way 40 miles through mountains. I made it, and hated the army every inch of the way. I wasn't in too bad shape when I checked in, though. A couple rabbits had failed to stay as alert as I was, so I didn't go entirely hungry, nor entirely naked. I had a nice, warm, thick coat of rabbit fat and dirt on my body and moccasins on my feet, the rabbits having no further use for their skins. It's amazing what you can do with a flake of rock if you have to. I guess our caveman ancestors weren't such dummies as we usually think. The others made it too. Those who were still around to try and didn't resign rather than take the test, all except two boys who died trying. Then we all went back into the mountains and spent 13 days finding them, working with copters overhead to direct us and all the best communication gear to help us and our instructors in powered command suits to supervise and to check rumors. Because the mobile infantry doesn't abandon its own while there is any thin shred of hope. Then we buried them with full honors to the strains of "This Land is Ours" and the posthumous posthumous rank of PFC, the first of our boot regiment to go that high, because a cap trooper isn't necessarily expected to stay alive. Dying is part of his trade. But they care a lot about how you die. It has to be heads up, on the bounce, and still trying. Breckenridge was one of them. Oh no! Breckenridge! Breckenridge was one of them. The other was an Aussie boy I didn't know. They weren't the first to die in training. They weren't the last. Oh, that's so sad. Alright, chapter 5. So usually at the beginning of the chapters, there's like a short excerpt of something, like a short quote. I forgot to mention that. So here's the short quote for chapter 5. He's bound to be guilty or he wouldn't be here. Starboard gun. Fire. Shooting's too good for 'em. Kick the louse out. Port gun. Fire. Ancient chanty used to time saluting guns. But that was after we had left Camp Curry, and a lot had happened in between. Combat training mostly, combat drill and combat exercises and combat maneuvers, using everything from bare hands to simulate nuclear weapons. Oh, simulated nuclear weapons. I hadn't known there were so many different ways to fight. Hands and feet to start with, and if you think those weren't weapons, you haven't seen Sergeant Zim and Captain Frankel, our battalion commander, demonstrate la savate, or had little Shujumi work you over with just his hands and a toothy grin. Zim made Shujumi an instructor for that purpose at once, and required us to take his orders, although we didn't have to salute him and say sir. Oh man. I do like how the combat training in the book is way different than it was in the movie. It seems more rigorous, to say the least, in the book. As our ranks thinned down, Zim quit bothering with formations himself, except parade, and spent more and more time in personal instruction, supplementing the corporal instructors. He was sudden death with anything, but he loved knives, and made and balanced his own, instead of using the perfectly good general issue ones. He mellowed quite a bit as a professional. Man, I cannot read tonight. Jeez. He mellowed quite a bit as a personal teacher, too, becoming merely unbearable instead of downright disgusting. He could be quite patient with silly questions. Once, during one of the 2-minute rest periods that were scattered sparsely through each day's work, one of the boys, a kid named Ted Hendrick, asked, "Sergeant, I guess this knife throwing is fun, but why do we have to learn it? What possible use is it?" "Well," answered Zim, "suppose all you have is a knife, or maybe not even a knife. What do you do? Just say your prayers and die? Or wade in and make him buy it somehow? Son, this is real. It's not a checker game you can concede if you find yourself too far behind." "But that's just what I mean, sir. Suppose you aren't armed at all, or just one of these toad stickers, say, and the man you're up against has all sorts of dangerous weapons. There's nothing you could do about it. He's got you licked on showdown." Zim said almost gently, "You've got it all wrong, son. There's no such thing as a dangerous weapon." "Huh, sir?" "There are no dangerous weapons. There are only dangerous men. We're trying to teach you to be dangerous to the enemy. Dangerous even without a knife. Deadly as long as you still have one hand or one foot and are still alive. If you don't know what I mean, go read Horatius at the Bridge or The Death of the Bonhomme Richard. They're both in camp library. But take the case you first mentioned. I'm you, and all you have is a knife. That target behind me, the one you've been missing, number 3, is a sentry, armed with everything but an H-bomb. You've got to get him, quietly, at once, and without letting him call for help." Zim turned slightly. Thunk! A knife he hadn't even had in his hand was quivering in the center of target number 3. "You see? Best to carry 2 knives. But get him you must, even barehanded." "Uh, something still troubling you? Speak up. That's what I'm here for, to answer your questions." Yes, sir. You said the sentry didn't have any H-bomb, but he does have an H-bomb. That's just the point." "Well, at least we have if we're the sentry. And any sentry we're up against is likely to have 'em too. I don't mean the sentry. I mean the side he's on." "I understand you." "Well, you see, sir, if we can use H-bomb, and as you said, it's a no checker game. It's real. It's war, and nobody's fooling around. Isn't it sort of ridiculous to go crawling around in the weeds, throwing knives, and maybe getting yourself killed and even losing the war, when you've got a real weapon you can use to win? What's the point in a whole lot of men risking their lives with obsolete weapons when one professor type can do so much more just by pushing a button?" Zim didn't answer at once, which wasn't like him at all. Then he said softly, "Are you happy in the infantry, Hendrik? You can resign, you know." Hendrik muttered something. Zim said, "Speak up!" I'm not itching to resign, sir. I'm going to sweat out my term." "I see. Well, the question you asked is one that a sergeant doesn't really qualify to answer, and one that you shouldn't ask me. You're supposed to know the answer before you join up. Or you should. Did your school have a course in history and moral philosophy?" "Oh, what? Well, sure, yes, sir." "Then you've heard the answer. But I'll give you my own unofficial views on it. If you wanted to teach a baby a lesson, Would you cut its head off? Why, no, sir. Of course not. You'd paddle it. There can be circumstances when it's just as foolish to hit an enemy city with an H-bomb as it would be to spank a baby with an axe. War is not violence and killing. Pure and simple war is controlled violence for a purpose. The purpose of war is to support your government's decisions by force. The purpose is never to kill the enemy just to be killing him, but to make him do what you want him to do. Not killing, but controlled and purposeful violence. But it's not your business or mine to decide the purpose of control. It's never a soldier's business to decide when or where or how or why he fights. That belongs to the statesmen and the generals. The statesmen decide why and how much. The generals take it from there and tell us where and when and how. We supply the violence. Other people, older and wiser heads, as they say, supply the control. Which is as it should be. That's the best answer I can give you. If it doesn't satisfy you, I'll get you a chit to go talk to the regimental commander. If he can't convince you, then go home and be a civilian. Because in that case, you will certainly never make a soldier. Zim bounced to his feet. I think you've kept me talking just to gold brick. What? I think you've kept me talking just to Goldbrick. I don't understand that reference. Up you come, soldiers, on the bounce. Man stations on target. Hendrik, you first. This time, I want you to throw that knife south of you. South? Get it? Not north. The target is due south of you, and I want that knife to go in a general southerly direction at least. I know you won't hit the target, but see if you can't scare it a little. Don't slice your ear off. Don't let it go off it and cut somebody behind you. Just keep what tiny mind you have fixed on the idea of south. Ready? On target? Let fly. Hendrik. Missed again. We trained with sticks and we trained with wire. Lots of nasty things you can improvise with a piece of wire. And we learned that what can be done with really modern weapons and how to do it and how to service and maintain the equipment. Simulated nuclear weapons and infantry rockets and various sorts of gas and poison and incendiary and demolition, as well as other things maybe best not discussed. But we learned a lot of obsolete weapons too. Bayonets on dummy guns, for example, and guns that weren't dummies too, but were almost identical with the infantry rifles of the 20th century, much like the sporting rifles used in hunting game, except that we fired nothing but solid slugs, alloyed jacketed lead bullets, both at targets on measured ranges and at surprise targets on booby-trapped skirmish runs. This was supposed to prepare us to learn to use any armed weapon and to train us to be on the bounce, alert, ready for anything. Well, I suppose it did. I'm pretty sure it did. We used these rifles in field exercises to simulate a lot of deadlier and nastier aimed weapons too. We used a lot. We used a lot of simulation. We had to. An explosive bomb or grenade against material or personnel would explode just enough to put out a lot of black smoke. Another sort of gave off a gas that would make you sneeze and weep. That told you that you were dead or paralyzed, and was nasty enough to make you careful about anti-gas precautions, to say nothing of the chewing out you got if you were caught by it. We got still less sleep. More than half the exercises were held at night, with snoopers and radar and audio gear and such. Man, their training sucked. The rifles used to simulate aimed weapons were loaded with blanks, except one in 500 rounds at random, which was a real bullet. What the? Oh my god, they just sneak in a real bullet in there, huh? That's kind of messed up. Dangerous? Yes and no. It's dangerous just to be alive, and a non explosive bullet probably won't kill you unless it hits you in the head or the heart, and maybe not even then. What that 1 in 500 for real did was to give us a deep interest in taking cover, especially as we knew that some of the rifles were being fired by instructors who were crack shots and actually trying their best to hit you. If the round happened not to be a blank, mm, they assured us that they would not intentionally shoot a man in the head, but accidents do happen. This friendly assurance wasn't very reassuring. That 500th bullet turned tedious exercises into large-scale Russian roulette. You stop being bored the very first time you hear a slug go wheat past your ear before you hear the crack of the rifle. But we did slack down anyhow, and word came down from the top that if we didn't get on the bounce, and the incidence of real ones would be changed to 1 in 100, and if that didn't work, to 1 in 50. I don't know whether a change was made or not. No way to tell, but I do know we tightened up again, because a boy in the next company got creased across his buttocks with a live one, producing an amazing scar and a lot of half-witty comments and a renewed interest by all hands in taking cover. We laughed at this kid for getting shot where he did, but we all knew it could have been his head, or our own heads. The instructors, who were not firing rifles, did not take cover. They put on white shirts and walked around upright with their silly canes, apparently calmly certain that even a recruit would not intentionally shoot an instructor, which may have been overconfidence on the part of some of them. Still, the chances were 500 to 1 that even a shot aimed with murderous intent would not be live, and the safety factor increased still higher because the recruit probably couldn't shoot that well anyhow. A rifle is not an easy weapon. It's got no target-seeking qualities at all. I understand that even back in the days when wars were fought and decided with just rifles, it used to take several thousand fired shots to average killing one man. This seems impossible, but the military histories agree that it is true. Apparently, most shots weren't really aimed, but simply acted to force the enemy to keep his head down and interfere with his shooting. In any case, we had no instructors wounded or killed by rifle fire. No trainees were killed either by rifle bullets. The deaths were all from other weapons or things, some of which could turn around and bite you if you didn't do things by the book. Well, one boy did manage to break his neck taking cover too enthusiastically when they first started shooting at him, but no bullet touched him. Jeez. However, By a chain reaction, this matter of rifle bullets and taking cover brought me to my lowest ebb at Camp Curry. In the first place, I had been busted out of my boot chevrons. Not over what I did, but over something one of my squad did when I wasn't even around, which I pointed out. Bronsky told me to button my lip, so I went to see Zim about it. He told me coldly that I was responsible for what my men did, regardless, and tacked on 6 hours of extra duty besides busting me for having spoken to him about it without Bronsky's permission. Then I got a letter that upset me a lot. My mother finally wrote to me. Then I sprained a shoulder in my first drill with powered armor. They've got those practice suits rigged so that the instructor can cause casualties in the suit at will. By radio control, I got dumped and hurt my shoulder. And this put me on light duty with too much time to think at a time when I had many reasons. It seemed to me to feel sorry for myself. Poor guy, he just got his suit and everything. Because of light duty, I was ordered that day in the battalion commander's office. I was eager at first, for I had never been there before and wanted to make a good impression. I discovered that Captain Frankel didn't want zeal. He wanted me to sit, and to sit still, say nothing, and not bother him. This left me time to sympathize with myself, for I didn't dare go to sleep. Then suddenly, shortly after lunch, I wasn't a bit sleepy. Sergeant Zim came in, followed by 3 men. Zim was smart and neat as usual, but the expression on his face made him look like death on a pale horse, and he had a mark on his right eye that looked as if it might be shaped up into a shiner, which was possible, of course. Of the other 3, the one in the middle was Ted Hendrick. He was dirty. Well, the company had been on a field exercise. They don't scrub those prairies, and you spend a lot of your time snuggling up to that dirt. But his lip was split, and there was blood on his chin and on his shirt, and his cap was missing. He looked wild-eyed. The men on each side of him wore boots. They each had rifles. Hendrick did not. One of them was from my squad, a kid named Levy. He seemed excited and pleased, and slipped me a wink when nobody was looking. Captain Frankel looked surprised. "What is this, Sergeant?" Zim stood frozen straight, and spoke as if he were reciting something by rote. "Sir, H Company Commander reports to the battalion commander. Discipline. Article 9107. Disregard of tactical command and doctrine, the team being in simulated combat. Article 9120. Disobedience of orders. Same conditions." Captain Frankel looked puzzled. "You are bringing this to me, Sergeant, officially?" I don't see how a man can manage to look as embarrassed as Zim looked, and still have no expression of any sort in his face or voice. "Sir, if the commander pleases, the man refused administrative discipline. He insisted on seeing the battalion commander." "I see. A bedroll lawyer. Well, I still don't understand it, Sergeant, but technically that's his privilege. What was the tactical command and doctrine?" Let's see. Let me make sure I'm reading the correct person. "A freeze, sir." I glanced at Hendrick, thinking, oh, Oh, he's going to catch it. In a freeze, you hit dirt, taking any cover you can, fast, and then freeze. Don't move at all, not even twitch an eyebrow until released. Or you could freeze when you're already in cover. They tell stories about men who had been hit while in freeze and had died slowly, but without ever making a sound or a move. Frankel's brows shot up. Second part. Same thing, sir. After breaking freeze, failing to return to it on being so ordered. Captain Frankel looked grim. Name? Zim answered. Hendrik T.C., sir. Recruit Private RP 7960924. Very well. Hendrik, you're deprived of all privileges for 30 days and restricted to your tent when not on duty or at meals. Subject only to sanitary necessities. You will serve 3 hours extra duty each day under the corporal of the guard. 1 hour to be served just before taps. 1 hour just before reveille. 1 hour at the time of the noonday meal and in place of it. Your evening meal will be bread and water, as much bread as you can eat. You will serve 10 hours extra duty each Sunday. The time will be adjusted to permit you to attend divine services if you so elect. I thought, oh my, he threw the book. Captain Frankel went on. Hendrik, the only reason you're getting off so lightly is that I am not permitted to give you any more than that without convening a court-martial. And I don't want to spoil your company's record. Dismissed. He dropped his eyes back to the papers on his desk. And the incident already forgiven. Oh my gosh, if only I could read. The incident already forgotten. And Hendrik yelled, You didn't hear my side of it. The captain looked up. Oh, sorry. You have a side? You're darn right I do. Sergeant Zims got it in for me. He has been riding me all day long from the time I got here. That's his job, the captain said coldly. Do you deny the 2 charges against you? No, but he didn't tell you I was lying on an anthill. Frankel looked disgusted. Oh, so you would get yourself killed, and perhaps your teammates as well, because of a few little ants. Not just a few. There were hundreds of them. Stingers. So, young man, let me put you straight. Had it been a nest of rattlesnakes, you would still have been expected and required to freeze. Frankel paused. Have you anything at all to say in your own defense? Hendrik's mouth was open. I certainly do. He hit me. He laid hands on me. The whole bunch of 'em are always strutting around with those silly batons, whacking you across the fanny, punching you between the shoulders, and telling you to brace up, and I put up with it. But he hit me with his hands. He knocked me down to the ground and yelled, Freeze, you stupid jackass! How about that? Captain Frankel looked down at his hands, looked up again at Hendrik. Young man, you are under a misapprehension very common among civilians. You think that your superior officers are not permitted to lay hands on you, as you put it. Under purely social conditions, that is true. Say if we happen to run across each other in a theater or a shop, I would have no more right as long as you treated me with the respect due my rank. A slap. Or a slap. What? Oh, there's a typo here. Or, not a typo. The letter's missing. To slap your face, then you have to slap mine. But in line of duty, the rule is entirely different. The captain swung around in his chair and pointed at some loose leaf books. There are laws under which you live. You can search every article in those books, every court-martial case which has arisen under them, and you will not find one word which says or implies that your superior officer may not lay hands on you or strike you in any manner in line of duty. Hendrik, I could break your jaw, and I simply would be responsible to my own superior officers as to the appropriate necessity of the act. But I would not be responsible to you. I could do more than that. There are circumstances under which a superior officer, commissioned or not, is not only permitted but required to kill an officer or a man under him, without delay, and perhaps without warning, and far from being punished, be commended. To put a stop to pusillanimous conduct in the face of the enemy, for example. The captain tapped on his desk. Now, about those batons. They have two uses. First, they mark the men in authority. Second, we expect them to be used on you, to touch you up and keep you on the bounce. You can't possibly be hurt with one, not the way they are used. At most they sting a little, but they save thousands of words. Say you don't turn out on the bounce at reveal. No doubt the duty corporal could wheedle you. Say, pretty please with sugar on top. Inquire if you'd like breakfast in bed this morning. If we could spare one career corporal just to nursemaid you. We can't. So he gives your bedroll a whack and trots on down the line, applying the spur where needed. Of course, he could simply kick you, which would be just as legal and nearly as effective, but the general in charge of training and discipline thinks that it is more dignified, both for the duty corporal and for you, to snap a late sleeper out of his fog with the impersonal rod of authority. And so do I. Not that it matters what you or I think about it. This is the way we do it. Captain Frankel sighed. Hendrik, I have explained these matters to you because it is useful and useless to punish a man unless he knows why he is being punished. You've been a bad boy. I say boy because you quite evidently aren't a man yet, although we'll keep trying. A surprisingly bad boy in view of the stage of your training. Nothing you have said is any defense, nor even any mitigation. You don't seem to know the score nor have any idea of your duty as a soldier, so tell me in your own words why you feel mistreated. I want to get you straightened out. There might even be something in your favor, though I confess that I cannot imagine what it could be. I had sneaked a look or two at Hendrik's face while the captain was chewing him out. Somehow his quiet, mild words were a worse chewing out than any Zim had ever given us. Hendrik's expression had gone from indignation to blank astonishment to soullessness. I mean, they went through so much, and this guy's surprised that he got kicked? Like, come on. Alright, let's see. Speak up! Franklin added sharply. Well, we were to freeze, and I hit the dirt, and I found I was on this anthill, so I got to my knees to move over a couple feet, and I was hit from behind and knocked flat, and he yelled at me, and I bounced up and popped him one, and he. Stop! Captain Franklin was out of his chair and standing 10 feet tall, though he's hardly taller than I am. He stared at Hendrik. You struck your company commander? Huh? I said so, but he hit me first, from behind. I didn't even see him. I don't take that off of anybody. I popped him, and then he hit me again, and then. Silence! Hendrik stopped. Then he added, I just want out of this lousy outfit. I think we can accommodate you, Franklin said icily. And quickly, too. Just give me a piece of paper and I'm resigning. One moment. Sergeant Zim. Yes, sir. Zim hadn't said a word for a long time. He just stood, eyes front and rigid as a statue, nothing moving but his twitching jaw muscles. I looked at him now and saw that it certainly was a shiner. A beaut. Hendrik must have caught him just right. But he hadn't said anything about it, and Captain Frankel hadn't asked. Maybe he had just assumed Zim had run into a door and would explain it if he felt like it later. Let's see. Have the pertinent articles been published to your company as required? Yes, sir, published, and I logged every Sunday morning. I know they have. I asked simply for the record. Just before church call every Sunday, they lined us up and read aloud the disciplinary articles out of the laws and regulations of the military forces. They were posted on the bulletin board too, outside the orderly tent. Nobody paid them much mind. It was just another drill. You could stand still and sleep through it. About the only thing we noticed, if we noticed anything, was what we called the 31 ways to crash land. After all, the instructors see to it that you soak up all the regulations you need to know through your skin. The crash landings were a worn out joke like ravioli and tent jackets. They were the 31 capital offenses. Now and then, somebody boasted or accused somebody else of having found a 32nd way. Always something preposterous and usually obscene. Striking a superior officer. It suddenly wasn't amusing any longer. Popping Zim? Hang a man for that? Why, almost everybody in the company had taken a swing at Sergeant Zim, and some of us had even landed when he was instructing us to hand-to-hand combat. He would take us on after the other instructors had worked us over, and we were beginning to feel cocky and pretty good at it. Then he would put the polish on. Why, shucks, I once saw Shujumi knock him unconscious. Bronsky threw water on him, and Zim got up and grinned and shook hands. And threw Shujumi right over the horizon. Captain Frankel looked around, motioned at me. You, flash regimental headquarters. I did it, all thumbs, stepping back when an officer's face came on and let the captain take the call. Adjutant? The face said. Franklin said crisply. 2nd Battalion Commander's respects to the regimental commander. I request and require an officer to sit as a court. The face said, When do you need him, Ian? As quickly as you can get him here. Oh, sorry, my face kind of got stuck for a second. Right away. I'm pretty sure Jake is in his HQ. Article and name? Captain Franklin identified Hendrik and quoted an article number. The face in the screen whistled and looked grim. On the bounce, Ian. If I can't get Jake, I'll be over myself, just as soon as I tell the old man. Captain Frankel turned to Zim. This escort, are they witnesses? Yes, sir. Did his section leader see it? Oh, I'm sorry. He's talking to Zim. This escort, are they witnesses? Yes, sir. Did his section leader see this? Zim barely hesitated. I think so, sir. Get him. Anybody out that way in a powered suit? Yes, sir. Zim used the phone while Frankel said to Hendrik, what witnesses do you wish to call in your defense? Huh? Or I don't need any witnesses. He knows what he did. Just hand me a piece of paper. I'm getting out of here. All in good time. In very fast time, it seemed to me. Less than 5 minutes later, Corporal Jones came bouncing up in a command suit, carrying Corporal Mahmoud in his arms. He dropped Mahmoud and bounced away just as Lieutenant Spakesman came in. He said, Afternoon, Captain. Accused and witnesses here? All set. Take it, Jake. Recorder on? It is now. Very well. Hendrik, step forward. Hendrik did so, looking puzzled and as if his nerve was beginning to crack. Lieutenant Spikesma said briskly, Field court-martial convened by order of Major F. X. Malloy, commanding 3rd Training Regiment, Camp Arthur Currie, under General Order No. 4, issued by the Commanding General, Training and Discipline Command, pursuant to the laws of regulation of the military forces, Terran Federation. Remanding Officer, Captain Ian Frankel, M.I., assigned and commanding 2nd Battalion, 3rd Regiment. The Court, Lieutenant Jacques Spixma, M.I., assigned to and commanding 1st Battalion, 3rd Regiment. Accused, Hendrik Theodore C., Recruit Private RP79600924. Article 9080. Charge, striking his superior officer, the Terran Federation then being in a state of emergency. The thing that got me was how fast it went. I found myself suddenly appointed an officer of the court and directed to remove the witnesses and have them ready. I didn't know how I would remove Sergeant Zim if he didn't feel like it, but he gathered Muhammad and the 2 boots up by eye, and they all went outside, out of earshot. Zim separated himself from the others and simply waited. Mahmoud sat down on the ground and rolled a cigarette, which he had put out, but he was the first one called. In less than 20 minutes, all 3 of them had testified, all telling much the same story Hendrik had. Zim wasn't called at all. Lieutenant Spikesma said to Hendrik, Do you wish to cross-examine the witnesses? The court will assist you if you so wish. No. Stand at attention and say, Sir, when you address the court. No, sir, he answered. I want a lawyer. The law does not permit counsel in field courts-martial. Do you wish to testify in your own defense? You are not required to do so, and in view of the evidence thus far, the court will take no judicial notice if you choose not to do so. But you are warned that any testimony that you give may be used against you, and that you will be subject to cross-examination. Hendrik shrugged. I haven't anything to say. What good would it do me? The court repeats, will you testify in your own defense? Uh, no, sir. The court must demand of you one technical question. Was the article under which you are charged published to you before the time of the alleged offense of which you stand accused? You may answer yes or no, or stand mute, but you are responsible for your answer under Article 9167, which relates to perjury. Oh man, he is really getting it. The accused stood mute. Very well. The court will reread the article of the charge aloud to you and again ask you that question. Article 9080. Any person in the military forces who strikes or assaults or attempts to strike or assault. Oh, I suppose they did. They read a lot of stuff every Sunday morning. A whole long list of things you couldn't do. Was or was not that particular article read to you? Uh, yes, sir, it was. Very well. Having declined to testify, do you have any statement to make in mitigation or extenuation? Sir, do you want to tell the court anything about it? Any circumstance which you think might possibly affect the evidence already given, or anything which might lessen the alleged offense? Such things as being ill or under drugs or medication. You are not under oath at this point. You may say anything at all which you think may help you. What the court is trying to find out is this. Does anything about this matter strike you as being unfair? If so, why? Huh? Well, of course it is. Everything about it is unfair. He hit me first. You heard him. He hit me first. Anything more? Huh? No, sir. Isn't that enough? The trial is completed. Recruit Private Theodore C. Hendrick, stand forth. Lieutenant Spixma had been standing at attention the whole time. Now, Captain Frankel stood up. The place suddenly felt chilly. Private Hendrick, you are found guilty as charged. My stomach did a flip-flop. They were going to do it to him. They were going to do the Danny Deaver to Ted Hendrick. And I had eaten breakfast beside him just this morning. The court sentences you, he went on, while I felt sick, to 10 lashes and bad conduct discharge. Hendrick gulped. I want to resign. The court does not permit you to resign. The court wishes to add that your punishment is light simply because this court possesses no jurisdiction to assign greater punishment. The authority which remanded you specified a field court-martial. Why it so chose, this court will not speculate. But you had been remanded for general court-martial. It seems certain that the evidence before this court would have caused a general court to sentence you to hang by the neck until dead. You are very lucky, and the remanding authority has been most merciful. Lieutenant Spixma paused, then went on. The sentence will be carried out at the earliest hour after the convening authority has reviewed and approved the record, if it does so approve. Court is adjourned. Remove and confine him. The last was addressed to me, but I didn't actually have to do anything about it, other than phone the guard tent and then get a receipt for him when he took him away. At afternoon sick call, Captain Frankel took me off orderly and sent me to see the doctor, who sent me back to duty. I got back to my company just in time to dress and fall in for parade, and to get gigged by Zim for spots on uniform. Well, he had a bigger spot over one eye, but I didn't mention it. Somebody had set up a big post in the parade ground just back of where the ad- adjutant stood. When it came time to publish the orders, instead of routine order of the day or other trivia, they published Hendrick's court-martial. Then they marched him out between two armed guards, with his hands cuffed together in front of him. I had never seen a flogging. Back home, well, they do it in public, of course. They do it back of the Federal building. And Father had given me strict orders to stay away from there. I tried disobeying him on it once, but it was postponed and I never tried to see one again. Once is too many. The guards lifted his arms and hooked the manacles over a big hook high up on the post. Then they took his shirt off, and it turned out that it was fixed so that it could come off and he didn't have an undershirt. The adjutant said crisply, "Carry out the sentence of the court." A corporal instructor from some other battalion stepped forward with the whip. The sergeant of the guard made the count. It's a slow count, 5 seconds between each one, and it seems much longer. Ted didn't let out a peep until the third. Then he sobbed. The next thing I knew, I was staring up at Corporal Bronsky. He was slapping me and looking intently at me. He stopped and asked, "Okay now, all right? Back in the ranks. On the bounce we're about to pass in review." We did so and marched back to our company areas. I didn't eat much dinner, but neither did a lot of them. Nobody said a word to me about fainting. He fainted. I found out later that I wasn't the only one. A dozen of us had passed out. Oh my gosh. I didn't expect that you fainted. Jeez. I was wondering why that sentence was weird. I just figured that I didn't follow along enough. Man. So this guy, he got flogged. I can't even imagine seeing that in person. Like, that has to honestly be very devastating, like mentally traumatic seeing that happen. And then they kicked the guy out. Shoot, man, that's crazy. I mean, he did seem like kind of a prick, though, honestly. All right, we are on chapter 6. Don't worry, it's kind of a long chapter, okay? You'll be all right. It's long, so take it easy. Chapter 6. And we have our quote. "What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated." Thomas Paine. It was the night after Hendrick was kicked out that I reached my lowest slump at Camp Curry. I couldn't sleep, and you have to have been through boot camp to understand just how far down a recruit has to sink before that can happen. But I hadn't had any real exercise all day, so I wasn't physically tired, and my shoulders still hurt even though I had been marked duty and I had that letter from my mother preying on my mind, and every time I closed my eyes I would hear that crack and see Ted slump against the whipping post. I wasn't fretted about losing my boot chevrons. That no longer mattered at all because I was ready to resign. Determined to. If it hadn't been the middle of the night and no pen and paper handy, I would have done so right then. Ted had made a bad mistake, one that lasted all of half a second. And it really had been just a mistake, too, because while he hated the outfit, man, who liked it? He had been trying to sweat it out and win his franchise. He meant to go into politics. He talked a lot about it when he got his citizenship. There will be some changes made. You wait and see. Well, he would never be in public office now. He had taken his finger off his number for a single instant, and he was through. If it could happen to him, it could happen to me. Suppose I slipped. Next day, or next week. Not even allowed to resign, but drummed out with my back stripped. Time to admit that I was wrong and father was right. Time to put in that little piece of paper and slink home and tell father that I was ready to go to Harvard and then go to work in his business if he would still let me. Time to see Sergeant Zim first thing in the morning and tell him that I had had it. But not until morning, because you don't wake Sergeant Zim except for something you're certain that he will class as an emergency. Believe me, you don't. Not Sergeant Zim. Sergeant Zim. He worried me as much as Ted's case did. After the court-martial was over and Ted had been taken away, he stayed behind and said to Captain Frankel, "May I ask... Wait, sorry, this is Zim. May I speak with the battalion commander, sir?" "Certainly. I was intending to ask you to stay behind for a word. Sit down." Zim flicked his eyes my way, and the captain looked at me, and I didn't have to be told to get out. I faded. There was nobody in the outer office, just a couple of civilian clerks. I didn't dare go outside because the captain might want me. I found a chair, back of a row of files, and sat down. I could hear them talking through the partition I had my head against. BHQ was a building rather than a tent, since it housed permanent communication and recording equipment. But it was a minimum field building, a shack. The inner partitions weren't much. I doubt if the civilians could hear as they each were wearing transcriber phones and were bent over typewriters. Besides, they didn't matter. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. Well, maybe I did. Zim said, "Sir, I request transfer to a combat team." Franklin answered, "I can't hear you, Charlie. My tin ear is bothering me again." Zim, "I'm quite serious, sir. This isn't my sort of duty." Franklin said testily, "Quit bellyaching your troubles to me, Sergeant. At least wait until we've disposed of the duty matters. What in the world happened?" Zim said stiffly, "Captain, that boy didn't write 10 lashes." Franklin answered, "Of course he doesn't. You know who goofed. And so do I." "Yes, sir, I know." "Well, you know even better than I do that these kids are wild animals at this stage. You know when it's safe to turn your back on them, and when it isn't. You know the doctrine and the standing orders about Article 9080. You must never give them a chance to violate it. Of course, some of them are going to try it. If they weren't aggressive, they wouldn't be material for the MI. They're docile in ranks. It's safe enough to turn your back when they're eating, or sleeping, or sitting on their tails and being lectured. but get them out in the field in a combat exercise or anything that gets them keyed up and full of adrenaline, and they're as explosive as a hateful, uh, what? A hatful of mercury fulminate. You know that. All you instructors know that. You're trained to watch for it, trained to snuff it out before it happens. Explain to me how it is possible for an untrained recruit to hang a mouse on your eye. He should never have laid a hand on you. You should have knocked him cold when you saw what he was up to. So why weren't you on the bounce? Are you slowing down? I don't know, Zim answered slowly. I guess I must be. Hmm. If true, a combat team is the last place for you. But it's not true. Or wasn't true the last time you and I worked out together 3 days ago. So, what slipped? Zim was slow in answering. I think I had him tagged in my mind as one of the safe ones. There are no such. Yes, sir, but he was so earnest, so doggedly determined to sweat it out. He didn't have any aptitude, but he kept on trying. That I must have done that. I must have done that subconsciously. Zim was silent, then added, I guess it was because I liked him. Frankel snorted. An instructor can't afford to like a man. I know it, sir, but I do. They're a nice bunch of kids. We've dumped all the real twerps by now. Hendrick's only shortcoming, aside from being clumsy, was that he thought he knew all the answers. I didn't mind that. I knew it all at that my age. I knew it all that age myself. And twerps have gone home, and those that are left are eager, anxious to please, and on the bounce. As cute as a litter of collie puppies. A lot of them will make soldiers. So that was the soft spot. You liked him. So you failed to clip him in time. So he winds up with a quart and the whip and a BCD. Sweet. Zim said earnestly, I wish to heaven there were some way for me to take that flogging myself, sir. You'd have to take your turn. I outrank you. What? What do you think I've been wishing the past hour? What do you think I was afraid of from the moment I saw you come in here sporting a shiner? I did my best to brush it off. I did my best to brush it off with administrative punishment, and the young fool wouldn't let well enough alone. But I never thought he would be crazy enough to blurt it out that he'd hung one on you. He's stupid. You should have eased him out of the outfit weeks ago, instead of nursing him along until he got into trouble. But blurt it out he did, to me, in front of witnesses, forcing me to take official notice of it. And that licked us. No way to get it off the record. No way to avoid a court. Just go through the whole dreary mess and take our medicine, and wind up with one more civilian who'll be against us the rest of his days, because he has to be flogged. Neither you nor I can take it from him, even though the fault was ours, because the regiment has to see what happens when 9080 is violated. Our fault, but his lumps. My fault, Captain. That's why I want to be transferred. Oh, sir, I think it's best for the outfit. Oh, do you, eh? But I decided what's best for my battalion, not you, Sergeant. Charlie, who do you think pulled your name out of the hat? And why? Think back 12 years ago. You were a corporal, remember? Where were you? Here, as you now quite Here, as you know quite well, Captain. Right here on this same god-forsaken prairie, and I wish I had never come back to it. Don't we all? But it happens to be the best and the most important and the most delicate work in the army, turning unspanked young cubs into soldiers. Who has the worst unspanked young cub in your section? Hmm. Zim answered slowly. I wouldn't go so far as to say you were the worst, Captain. You wouldn't, eh? But you'd have to think hard to name another candidate. I hated your guts. Corporal Zim. Zim sounded surprised and a little hurt. You did, Captain? I didn't hate you. I rather liked you. So? Well, hate is the other luxury an instructor can never afford. We must not hate them. We must not like them. We must teach them. But if you liked me then, it seems to me that you had very strange ways of showing it. Do you still like me? Don't answer that. I don't care whether you do or not. Or rather, I don't want to know, whichever it is. Never mind. I despised you then, and I used to dream about ways to get you. But you were always on the bounce and never gave me a chance to buy a 9080 quart of my own. So, here I am, thanks to you. Now, to handle your request. You used to have one order that you gave me over and over again when I was a boot. I got so I got so uh what? Sentence makes no sense. I got so I loathed it. It almost more than anything else you did or said. Do you remember it? I do. And now I'll give it back to you. Soldier, shut up and soldier. Yes, sir. Don't go yet. This weary mess isn't all loss. Any regiment of boots needs a stern lesson in the meaning of 9080, as we both know. They haven't yet learned to think. They won't read, and they barely listen, but they can see. And young Hendrick's misfortune may save one of his mates, some day, from swinging by the neck until he's dead, dead, dead. But I'm sorry, the object lesson had to come from my battalion, and I certainly don't intend to let this battalion supply another one. You get your instructors together and warn them. For about 24 hours, those kids will be in a state of shock. Then they'll turn sullen, and the tension will build. Along with Thursday or Friday, some boy who's about to flunk out anyhow will start thinking over the fact that Hendrick didn't get so very much. Not even the number of lashes for drunken driving. And he's going to start brooding that it might be worth it to take a swing at the instructor he hates worst. Sergeant, that blow must never land. Understand me? Yes, sir. I want them to be 8 times as cautious as they have been. I want them to keep their distance. I want them to have eyes in the backs of their heads. I want them to be as alert as a mouse at a cat show. Bronsky, you have a special word with Bronsky, and he has a tendency to fraternize. I'll straighten Bronsky out, sir. See that you do. Because when the next kid starts swinging, it's got to be stop punched, not muffed like today. The boy has got to be knocked cold, and the instructor must go so without ever being touched himself. Or I'll demand, well, or I'll be damned well break him for incompetence. Let them know that. They've got to teach those kids that it's not merely expensive, but impossible to violate 9080. That even trying it wins a short nap, a bucket of water in the face, and a very sore jaw, and nothing else. Yes, sir. It'll be done. It, it had better be done. I will not break the instructor who slips. I will personally take him way out on the prairie and give him lumps, because I will not have another one of my boys strung up to that whipping post through sloppiness on the part of his teachers. Dismissed. Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Captain. What's good about it, Charlie? Yes, sir. If you're not too busy this evening, why don't you bring your soft shoes and your pads over to Officers' Row, and we'll go waltzing Matilda? Say about 8 o'clock? Yes, sir. That's not an order. That's an invitation. If you really are slowing down, maybe I'll be able to kick your shoulder blades off. Oh, well, would the captain care to put a small band on it? Huh? With me sitting here at this desk getting swivel chair spread? I will not. Not unless you agree to fight with one foot in a bucket of cement. Seriously, Charlie, we've had a miserable day, and it's going to be worse before it gets better. If you and I work up a good sweat and swap a few lumps, maybe we'll be able to sleep tonight, despite all of Mother's little darlings. I'll be there, Captain. Don't eat too much dinner. I need to work off a couple of matters myself. I'm not going to dinner. I'm going to sit right here and sweat out this quarterly report, which the regimental commander is graciously pleased to see right after his dinner, and which somebody whose name I won't mention has put me 2 hours behind, so I may be a few minutes late for our waltz. Go away now, Charlie, and don't bother me. See you later. Whoa! Zim got his ass chewed. Sergeant Zim left so abruptly that I barely had time to lean over and tie my shoe, and thereby be out of sight behind the file case as he passed through the outer office. Captain Frankel was already shouting, "Orderly! Orderly! Orderly! Do I have to call you 3 times? What's your name? Put yourself down for an hour's extra duty, full kit. Find the company's commanders of E, F, and G. My compliments, and I'll be pleased to see them before parade. Then bounce over to my tent and fetch me a clean dress uniform, cap, sidearms, shoes, ribbons, no medals. Lay it out for me here. Then make afternoon sick call. If you can scratch with that arm, as I've seen you doing, your shoulder can't be too sore. You've got 39 minutes until sick call. On the bounce, soldier." I made it by catching 2 of them in the senior instructor's shower. An orderly can go anywhere, and the third at his desk. The orders you get aren't impossible. They merely seem so, because they nearly are. I was lying out Captain Frankel's uniforms for parade as sick call sounded. Without looking up, he growled, "Belay that extra duty. Dismissed." So, I got home just in time to catch extra duty for uniform untidy in 2 particles and See the sickening end of Ted Hendricks' time in the MI. So, I had plenty to think about as I lay awake that night. I had known that Sergeant Zim worked hard, but it had never occurred to me that he could possibly be other than completely and smugly self-satisfied with what he did. He looked so smug, so self-assured, so at peace with the world and himself. The idea that this invincible robot could feel that he had failed, could feel so deeply and personally disgraced that he wanted to run away, hide his face among strangers, and offer the excuse that his leaving would be best for the outfit, shook me up as much. And in a way, even more than seeing Ted flogged. To have Captain Frankel agree with him as to the seriousness of the failure, I mean, and then rub his nose in it, chew him out. Well, I mean, really. Sergeants don't get chewed out. Sergeants do the chewing. A law of nature. But I had to admit that what Sergeant Zim had taken and swallowed was so completely humiliating and withering as to make the worst I had ever heard or overheard from a sergeant sound like a love song. And yet the captain hadn't even raised his voice. The whole incident was so preposterously unlikely that I was never even tempted to mention it to anyone else. And Captain Frankel himself, officers we didn't see very often. They showed up for evening parade, sauntering over at the last moment and doing nothing that would work up a sweat. They inspected once a week, making private comments to sergeants, comments that invariably meant grief for somebody else, not them. And they decided each week what company had won the honor of guarding the regimental colors. Aside from that, they popped up occasionally on surprise inspections, creased, immaculate, remote, and smelling faintly of cologne, and went away. Oh, one or more of them did. Oh, hold on a second. There we go. The, and we have some fireworks going off, and the dogs are a little frightened. I kind of lost my spot. Okay, here we go. Oh, one or more of them did always accompany us on route marches, and twice Captain Frankel had demonstrated his virtuous virtuosity at La Savate. But officers didn't work, not real work, and they had no worries because sergeants were under them, not over them. But it appeared that Captain Frankel worked so hard that he skipped meals, was kept so busy with something or other that he complained of lack of exercise, and would waste his own free time just to work up a sweat. As for worries, he had honestly seemed to be even more upset at what had happened to Hendrik than Zim had been. And yet, he hadn't even known Hendrik by sight. He had been forced to ask his name. I had an unsettling feeling that I had been completely mistaken as to the very nature of the world I was in, as if every part of it was something wildly different from what it appeared to be. Like discovering that your own mother isn't anyone you've ever seen before, but a stranger in a rubber mask. But I was sure of one thing. I didn't even want to find out what the MI really was. If it was so tough that even the gods that be, sergeants and officers, were made unhappy by it, it was certainly too tough for Johnny. How could you keep from making mistakes in an outfit you didn't understand? I didn't want to swing by my neck till I was dead, dead, dead. I didn't even want to risk being flogged, even though the doctor stands by to make certain that it doesn't do you any permanent injury. Nobody in our family had ever been flogged, except paddlings in school, of course, which isn't at all the same thing. There were no criminals in our family on either side, none who had ever none who had even been accused of crime. We were a proud family. The only thing we lacked was citizenship, and father regarded that as no real honor, a vain and useless thing. But if I were flogged, well, he'd probably have a stroke. And yet, Hendrik hadn't done anything that I hadn't thought about doing 1,000 times. Why hadn't I? Timid, I guess. I knew that those instructors, any one of them, could beat the tar out of me, so I had buttoned my lip and hadn't tried it. No guts, Johnny. At least Ted Hendrick had had guts. I didn't have any. And a man with no guts has no business in the army in the first place. Besides, besides that, Captain Frankel hadn't even considered it to be Ted's fault. Even if I didn't buy a 9080 through lack of guts, what day would I do something other than a 9080? Something not my fault, and wind up slumped against the whipping post anyhow. Time to get out, Johnny, while you're still ahead. My mother's letters simply confirmed my decision. I had been able to harden my heart to my parents as long as they were refusing me, but when they softened, I couldn't stand it. Or when mother softened, at least. She had written. I had to take a sip. She had written, "But I am afraid I must tell you that your father will still not permit your name to be mentioned. But, dearest, that is his way of grieving, since he cannot cry. You must understand, my darling baby, that he loves you more than life itself, more than he does me, and that you have hurt him very deeply. He tells the world that you are a grown man, capable of making your own decisions, and that he is proud of you. But that is his own pride speaking, the bitter hurt of a proud man who has been wounded deep in his heart by the one he loves best. You must understand, Juanito, that he does not speak of you, and has not written to you because he cannot. Not yet. Not till his grief becomes bearable. When it has, I will know it, and then I will intercede for you, and we will all be together again." Myself? How could anything her baby boy does anger his mother? You can hurt me, but you cannot make me love you the less. Wait. Oh, hold on. This is still her talking. My bad. Myself? How could anything her baby boy does anger his mother? You can hurt me, but you cannot make me love you the less. Wherever you are, whatever you choose to do, you are always my little boy who bangs his knee and comes running to my lap for comfort. My lap has shrunk, or perhaps you have grown, though I have never believed it. But none the less, it will always be waiting when you need it. Little boys never get over needing their mother's laps, do they, darling? I hope not. I hope that you will write and tell me so. But I must add that, in view of the terribly long time that you have not written, it is probably best, until I let you know otherwise, for you to write to me care of your Aunt Eleonora. She will pass it on to me at once, and without causing any more upset. You understand. 1,000 kisses to my baby, your mother. I can't even imagine a, a grown man. Well, I mean, he's 18, right? He's an 18-year-old guy getting a letter like this from his mom while he's at basic training. Like, I can't. God forbid anybody finds this letter and reads it out loud while he's in training. I understood, alright. And if father could not cry, I could. I did. And at last I got to sleep and was awakened at once by an alert. We bounced out to the bombing range, the whole regiment, and ran through a simulated exercise without ammo. We were wearing full unarmored kit otherwise, including earplug receivers, and we had no more than extended when the word came to freeze. We held that freeze for at least an hour. And I mean, we held it, barely breathing. A mouse tiptoeing past would have sounded noisy. Something did go past and ran right over me. A coyote, I think. I never twitched. We got awfully cold holding that freeze, but I didn't care. I knew it was my last. I didn't even hear reveal the next morning. For the first time in weeks I had to be whacked out of my sack and barely made formation for morning jerks. There was no point in trying to resign before breakfast anyhow, since I had to see Zim as the first step. But he wasn't at breakfast. I did ask Bronski's permission to see the CC, and he said, "Sure, help yourself," and didn't ask me why. But you can't see a man who isn't there. We started a route march uh after breakfast, and I still hadn't laid eyes on him. It was an out and back, with lunch fetched out to us by copter, an unexpected luxury, since failure to issue field rations before marching usually meant practice starvation, except for whatever you had cached. And I hadn't too much on my mind. Sergeant Zim came out with the rations, and he held mail call in the field, which was not an unexpected luxury. I'll say this for the MI: they might chop off your food, water, sleep, or anything else without warning, but they never held up a person's mail a minute longer than circumstances required. That was yours, and they got it to you by the first transportation available, and you could read it at your earliest break, even on maneuvers. This hadn't been too important for me, as, aside from a couple of letters from Carl, I hadn't had anything but junk mail until Mother wrote to me. I didn't even gather around when Zim handed it out. I figured now on not speaking to him until he got in. No point in giving him reason to notice me until we were actually in reach of headquarters. So, I was surprised when he called my name and held up a letter. I bounced over and took it, and was surprised again. It was from Mr. Du Bois, my high school instructor in history and moral philosophy. I would sooner have expected a letter from Santa Claus. Then, when I read it, it still seemed like a mistake. I had to check the address and the return address to convince myself that he had written it and had meant it for me. My dear boy, I would have written to you much sooner to express my delight and my pride in learning that you had not only volunteered to serve, but also had chosen my own service. But not to express surprise, it was what I expected of you. Except, possibly, the addition and very personal business that you chose the MI. This is the sort of consummation which does not happen too often, that nevertheless makes all of a teacher's efforts worth while. We necessarily sift a great many pebbles, much sand for each nugget, but the nuggets are the reward. By now the reason I did not write at once is obvious to you. Many young men, not necessarily through any reprehensible fault, are dropped during recruit training. I have waited, I have kept in touch through my own connections, until you had sweated it out past the hump. How we all know that hump, and were certain, barring accidents or illness, of completing your training and your term. You are now going through the hardest part of your service. Not the hardest physically, though physical hardship will never trouble you again. You now have its measure. But the hardest, spiritually, the deep, soul turning readjustments and re-evaluations necessary to metamorphosize a potential citizen into one in a being. Or rather, I should say, you have already gone through the hardest part, despite all the tribulations you still have ahead of you, and all the hurdles, each higher than the last, which you still must clear. But it is that hump that counts, and knowing you, lad, I know that I have waited long enough to be sure that you are past your hump. Or you would be home now. When you reached that spiritual mountain top, you felt something. A new something. Perhaps you haven't words for it. I know I didn't when I was a boot. So perhaps you will permit an older comrade to lend you the words, since it often helps to have discreet words. Simply this: the noblest feat that a man can endure is to place his own mortal body between his loved home and the war's desolation. The words are not mine, of course, as you will recognize. Basic truths cannot change, and once a man of insight expresses one of them, it is never necessary, no matter how much the world changes, to reformulate them. This is an immutable, true everywhere, throughout all time, for all men and all nations. Let me hear from you, please, if you can spare an old man some of your precious sack time to write an occasional letter. And if you should happen to run across any of my former mates, give them my warmest greetings. Good luck, trooper. You've made me proud. Jean V. Du Bois, Lieutenant Colonel M.I. Retired. The signature was as amazing as the letter itself. Old Sourmouth was a short colonel? Why, our regional commander was only a major. Mr. Du Bois had never used any sort of rank around school. We had supposed, if we thought about it at all, that he must have been a corporal or some such, who had been let out when he lost his hand and had been fixed up with a soft job teaching a course that didn't have to be passed or even taught, just audited. Of course, we had known that he was a veteran, since history and moral philosophy must be taught to a citizen, but an M.I.? He didn't look it. Prissy, faintly scornful, a dancing master type? Not one of us apes. But that was the way he had signed himself. I spent the whole long hike back to camp thinking about that amazing letter. It didn't sound in the least like anything he had ever said in class. Oh, I don't mean it contradicted anything he had told us in class. It was just entirely different in tone. Since when does a short colonel call a recruit private comrade? When he was playing Mr. Du Bois, and I was one of the kids who had to take his course, he hardly seemed to see me, except once when he got me sore by implying that I had too much money and not enough sense. So, my old man could have bought the school and given it to me for Christmas. Is that a crime? It was none of his business. He had been droning along about value, comparing the Marxist theory with the orthodox use theory. Mr. Du Bois had said, "Of course, the Marxian definition of value is ridiculous. All the work one cares to add will not turn a mud pie into an apple tart. It remains a mud pie. Value zero. By colliery unskillful work can easily subtract value. An untalented cook can turn wholesome dough and fresh green apples, valuable already, into an inedible mess. Value zero. Conversely, a great chef can fashion of those same materials a confection of greater value than a commonplace apple tart, with no more effort than an ordinary cook uses to prepare an ordinary sweet." These kitchen illustrations demolish the Marxian theory of value, the fallacy from which the entire magnificent fraud of communism derives, and illustrate the truth of the common sense definition as measured in terms of use. Du Bois had waved his stump at us. "Nevertheless, wake up back there!" Nevertheless, the dishevelled old mystic of Das Kapital, turgid, tortured, confused, and neurotic, unscientific, illogical, this pompous fraud, Karl Marx, nevertheless, had a glimmering of a very important truth. If he had possessed an analytical mind, he might have formulated the first adequate definition of value, and this planet might have been saved endless grief. "Or might not," he added. "You!" I had sat up with a jerk. "If you can't listen, perhaps you can tell the class whether value is a relative or an absolute." I had been listening. I just didn't see any reason not to listen with eyes closed and spine relaxed. But his question caught me out. I hadn't read that day's assignment. An absolute," I answered, guessing. "Wrong," he said coldly. "Value has no meaning other than in relation to living things. The value of a thing is always relative to a particular person, and completely personal and different in quantity for each living human. Market value is a fiction, merely a rough guess at the average of personal values, all of which must be quantitatively different, or trade would be impossible." I had wondered what father would have said if he had heard market value called a fiction. Snort in disgust, probably. This very personal relationship, value, has two factors for a human being. First, what he can do with a thing, its use to him. And second, what he must do to get it, its cost to him. There is an old song which asserts the best things in life are free. Not true. Utterly false. This was the tragic fallacy which brought on the decadence and collapse of the democracies of the 20th century. Those noble experiments failed because the people had been led to believe that they could simply vote for whatever they wanted and get it without toil, without sweat, without tears. Nothing of value is free. Even the breath of life is purchased at birth only through gasping effort and pain. He had been still looking at me, and added, If you boys and girls had to sweat for your toys the way a newly born baby has to struggle to live, you would be happier and much richer. As it is with some of you, I pity the poverty of your wealth. You! I've just awarded you the prize for the 100-meter dash. Does it make you happy? Uh, I suppose it would? No dodging, please. You have the prize. Here, I'll write it out. Grand prize for the championship 100-meter sprint. He had actually come back to my seat and pinned it on my chest. There. Are you happy? You value it? Or don't you? I was sore. First, that dirty crack about rich kids, a typical sneer of those who haven't got it, and now this farce. I ripped it off and chucked it at him. Mr. Du Bois had looked surprised. Oh, it doesn't make you happy? You know darn well I placed fourth. Exactly. The prize for first place is worthless to you because you haven't earned it. But you enjoy a modest satisfaction in placing fourth. You earned it. I trust that some of the somnambulists here understand this little morality play. I fancy that the poet who wrote that song meant to imply that the best things in life must be purchased other than with money, which is true, just as the literal meaning of his words is false. The best things in life are beyond money. Their price is agony and sweat and devotion. And the price demanded for the most precious of all things in life is life itself. Ultimate cost for perfect value. I mulled things over. I had heard Mr. Du Bois, Colonel Du Bois, say, as well as his extraordinary letter, while we went swinging back toward camp. Then I stopped thinking because the band had dropped back near our position in column, and we sang for a while. A French group, Ma- Marcy, Mar- Marseillaise, of course, and Madeleine, and Sons of Toil and Danger, and then Legion Étrangère, and Mademoiselle from Armentières. Sorry, I cannot read French. I have no idea what I'm saying. It's nice to have the band play. It picks you right up when your tail is dragging the prairie. We hadn't had anything but canned music at first, and that only for parade and calls. But the powers that be had found out early who could play and who couldn't. Instruments were provided, and a regimental band was organized. All our own. Even the director and the drum major were boots. It didn't mean they got out of anything. Oh no, it just meant they were allowed and encouraged to do it on their own time, practicing evenings and Sundays and such, and that they got to strut and countermarch and show off at the parade instead of being in ranks with their platoons. A lot of things that we did were run that way. Our chaplain, for example, was a boot. He was older than most of us, and had been ordained in some obscure little sect I had never heard of, but he put a lot of passion into his preaching, whether his theology was orthodox or not. Don't ask me. And he was certainly in a position to understand the problems of a recruit. And the singing was fun. Besides, there was nowhere else to go on Sunday morning between morning police and lunch. The band suffered a lot of attrition, but Somehow they always kept it going. The camp owned 4 seats of pipes and some Scottish uniforms donated by the local Lochiel of Cameroon, whose son had been killed there in training, and one of us boots turned out to be a piper. He had learned it in the Scottish Boy Scouts. Pretty soon, we have 4 pipers. Maybe not good, but loud. Pipes seem very odd when you first hear them, and a tyro practicing can set your teeth on edge. It sounds and looks as if he had a cat under his arm, its tail in his mouth and biting it. Oh my gosh. But they grow on you. The first time our pipers kicked their heels out in front of the band, skirling away at Alamein Dead. My hair stood up so straight it lifted my cap. It gets you. Makes tears. We couldn't take a parade band out on route march, of course, because no special allowances were made for the band. Tubas and bass drums had to stay behind because a boy in the band had to carry a full a full kit, same as everybody, and could only manage an instrument small enough to add to his load. But the MI has band instruments, which I don't believe anybody else has, such as a little box hardly bigger than a harmonica, an electric gadget which does an amazing job of faking a big horn and is played the same way. Comes band call when you are headed for the horizon. Each bandsman sheds his kit without stopping. His squad mates split it up, and he trots to the column position of the color company and starts blasting. It helps. The band drifted off, almost out of earshot, and we stopped singing because your own singing drowns out the beat when it's too far away. I suddenly realized I felt good. I tried to think why I did. Because we would be in after a couple of hours and I could resign? No. When I had decided to resign, it had indeed given me a measure of peace, quieted down my awful jitters, and let me go to sleep. But this was something else, and no reason for it that I could see. Then I knew. I had passed my hump. I was over the hump that Colonel Du Bois had written about. I actually walked over it and started down, swinging easily. The prairie through there was flat as a griddle cake, but just the same, I had been plodding wearily uphill all the way out and about halfway back. Then at some point, I think it was while we were singing, I had passed the hump, and it was all downhill. My kit felt lighter, and I was no longer worried. When we got in, I didn't speak to Sergeant Zim. I no longer needed to. Instead, he spoke to me, motioned me to him as we fell out. Yes, sir? This is a personal question, so don't answer it unless you feel like it. He stopped, and I'd wondered if he suspected that I had overheard his chewing out and shivered. At the mail call today, he said, you got a letter. I noticed, purely by accident. None of my business. The name on the return address. It's a fairly common name, some places, but this is the personal question you need not answer. By any chance, does the person who wrote that letter have his left hand off at the wrist? I guess my chin dropped. How did you know, sir? I was nearby when it happened. It was Colonel Du Bois, right? Yes, sir. I added. He was my high school instructor in history and moral philosophy. I think that was the only time I ever impressed Sergeant Zim, even faintly. His eyebrows went up an eighth of an inch, and his eyes widened slightly. So, you were extraordinarily fortunate, he added. When you answer his letter, if you don't mind, you might say that Ship's Sergeant Zim sends his respects. Oh, yes, sir. Oh, I think maybe he sent you a message, sir. What? I'm not certain. I took out the letter, read just, if you should happen to run across any of my former mates, give them my warmest greetings. Is that for you, sir? Zim pondered it, his eyes looking through me somewhere else. Yes, it is. For me, among others. Thanks very much. Then, suddenly, it was over, and he said briskly, 9 minutes to parade. You still have to shower and change. On the bounce, soldier. And that brings us to the end of chapter 6. Well, I guess good old Johnny Boy made it to the end of his basic training, or it seems like he's just about there. He hasn't quit yet, which, I guess if he did quit, that'd be the end of the book, right? But we're not halfway, but we're a little over a third of the way through the book. So we still got some chapters in there. But what do you guys think of the book so far? I'm enjoying the book a lot, actually. I like it way more than the movie, honestly. It's actually has deeper meanings, and everyone seems like an actual interesting character to help move along the story and to get you into the proper headspace of what our Johnny Boy here is dealing with. But let me know in the comments, or shoot me a message in the Discord, or I don't know, send me a message on Twitter. But I hope you guys all enjoyed it. I hope you have a good night or a great day, and I will see you on Tuesday. Have a good one. Bye.